superhero, toolman, America's favorite TV dad, and drug trafficking felon? Could it be? Tim Allen is one of America's favorite TV dads. He has played a family man in countless classics like Toy Story, The Santa Claus, and Home Improvement. But did you know that Tim was not always the family man that he's known as today? Tim has a past, and he overcame a lot before becoming America's favorite TV dad. So today we are deep diving into Tim Allen's struggle with addiction, incarceration, and how he overcame it to become one of the most successful and well-known family men in TV history. Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Tracy. I am a therapist and an individual in long-term recovery, and my goal is to help you build a happy and successful life after addiction, because if Tim Allen can do it and I can do it, then you can do it too. So how does one go from being arrested trafficking over a pound of cocaine and spending years in prison to becoming Buzz Lightyear and Tim the Toolman Taylor, an icon of family and fatherhood? Today, we are going to share all of the deets of Tim's incredible transformation. And please note, this video is not in any way to bash Tim Allen. I love Tim Allen. I've always loved Tim Allen, as a dad, and I always will. But if you took a look at Tim Allen's past, years before Tim Allen was the voice of Buzz Lightyear and the star of Last Man Standing, before Home Improvement and before The Santa Claus, you would have found him sitting in federal prison, serving a multi-year sentence after being busted trafficking cocaine. And what's even more interesting to me as an addiction professional isn't just what happened here, it's what happened after. Because Tim Allen's story isn't simply a story about drugs and addiction. It's a story about grief and shame and life-changing consequences, and ultimately what happens when someone truly decides to change the trajectory of their life. And there's one part of this story that I think is especially important for anyone who believes that the person they are today is the person that they always have to be. Tim and I both know firsthand, never say never. So let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning. I'm a 90s baby, all right? And Home Improvement was a staple in my house. Tim Allen, along with Liam Neeson, of course, has always been one of my favorite TV dads. Tim the Toolman Taylor was a kind-hearted, clumsy father. Buzz Lightyear was a cult kids classic. And Santa Claus, literally the epitome of all things magical and familyhood. Tim is known for family-friendly comedy. And this is the Tim Allen that we have all come to know and love. And that's exactly why his story is so fascinating. Because when you look at the man that most of us probably grew up watching, you would probably never guess that Tim had a secret. That a few years earlier, his life looked drastically different than it does today. Drastically darker than it does today. But here's the thing I want to make clear. This is not a video about us digging up someone's worst moments for entertainment. Tim Allen has publicly discussed his past many times. So I'm going to focus on the parts of his story that he has not discussed publicly, and then I'm going to look at it through the lens of addiction and recovery and what we can learn from him. Tim Allen was born as Timothy Allen Dick on June 13th, 1953. Tim was raised in Denver, Colorado with his 4 sisters and 1 brother. But at 11 years old, Tim, his siblings, and his mother moved to Birmingham, Michigan after experiencing a devastating family tragedy. Tim's father had been killed in a car crash by a drunk driver when he was just 11 years old. After moving to Michigan, Tim's mother eventually remarried, and Tim gained 3 more siblings from his mother's second marriage. Tim was very close with his siblings. They especially bonded through the devastation of losing their father, and Tim has frequently said that his relationship with his brothers directly shaped his identity, personality, and comic career. But even though Tim's family supports were strong, the tragedy still took its toll on him, and Tim began experimenting with alcohol at age 11, right around the time that his father was killed. He has publicly noted that cowboy movies heavily influenced him. He said that watching the characters in the movie drink their brown, comforting liquid looked refreshing. He followed suit with his very first drink being Jim Beam. Despite it tasting like gasoline and making him choke, Tim learned that he could mix it with brown sugar to make it go down a little more smoothly. Now, Tim's alcoholism progressed very quickly, and he has admitted to learning manipulation from a very early age, telling adults what they want to hear and then stealing their alcohol. Unlike most of his friends who threw up or passed out when they drank too much, drinking did not seem to visibly affect him or slow him down, and he very quickly realized that he never wanted to refuse a drink and that it was never enough. Now, I'm going to be really careful here, okay? I'm not going to sit here and diagnose Tim based on his interviews or tell you that his father's death directly caused him to become an alcoholic. That's not something that any of us can know. But what we can and do recognize here is something that we see very frequently in addiction. People don't develop problematic relationships with substances in a vacuum, and they certainly do not become addicts because they chose to. There are often multiple factors, including environment, genetics, trauma, grief, and opportunity, all interacting. Just something that I want to point out so that we can make sure to look at everyone fairly and never judge someone for what they're going through. So despite his struggles with alcohol, Tim graduated high school and went on to enroll at Central Michigan University. He graduated from university in 1976 with a bachelor in communications. Also during his time at Michigan University, he met his first wife, Laura Devil. However, it was also during these years that he secretly began dealing small amounts of drugs. And what started with low-level dealing, probably mostly to support his own habit, quickly snowballed into some high-stakes cocaine trafficking by his mid-20s. Tim has described himself during this era as an angry adolescent who was climbing a dangerous ladder without thinking about what was at the bottom. On October 2nd, 1978, at only 25 years old, Allen was busted by an undercover officer at the Kalamazoo, Michigan airport. He had over 650 grams of cocaine stashed in a brown Adidas bag inside of an airport locker. Now, at this time, Michigan had a very strict 650 lifer drug law, and Tim was facing the reality of life in prison. But as Tim was faced with spending the rest of his life in prison, he decided to cooperate with investigators, and he provided the names of approximately 20 or so high-level traffickers, which helped convict several major players in the game at the time. In exchange for this, his sentence was drastically reduced, and he ended up spending only 2 years and 4 months at the Federal Correctional Facility in Sandstone, Minnesota. And this is where I think we need to pause, because there's a big temptation when we tell celebrity addiction stories to say, oh, he got arrested and he went to prison, he turned his life around, and now he's fine. But that's not actually how recovery works, not even for celebrities. Consequences can stop a behavior temporarily, but they don't heal what's going on underneath it. Now, when Tim first entered prison, he has publicly stated that reality hit him so hard, it literally took his strength away. He was crammed into a holding cell with 20 strangers who all had to share the open toilet in the middle of the room. And initially, upon coming into prison, Tim seriously considered ending his life. Tim has described federal prison as highly dangerous, stating that other inmates would choose to pick on the weakest or the most innocent of the crowd, simply out of boredom. Tim, however, chose to keep his head down, has been quoted saying, "I just shut up and did what I was told. I learned to live day by day." So the prison environment was unforgivingly volatile, and Alan noted that he did not really maintain any prison friendships, revealing that the two people he met in there that he actually liked were shot to death the exact same day they were released. He has also described his time in the Federal Correctional Institution in Sandstone, Minnesota, as a brutal reality check, a survival test, and ultimately a crucible that forced him to take responsibility for his own life. He said that being funny saved his life on the inside, in the inside, and on the outside. He quickly realized that making the guards or tough inmates laugh changed the entire vibe of the room, and that kept people from targeting him. He grew so dedicated to using comedy to shift the atmosphere that he eventually started a comedy show in the prison as part of an inmate motivational speaker program. While incarcerated, Alan says that he started reading a lot of autobiographies of historically successful people, and he noted that they all shared some common traits. He noted that they made lists, they maintained focus, and they stuck to their goals no matter what it took. Tim now credits his prison experience to forcing him to grow up and being quoted as thinking, "You're in prison, you idiot. You got yourself here. No one else is to blame but you." And for the first time, he took real responsibility for himself. And one of the things that I find interesting about this part of the story is the shift here from immediate gratification to delayed gratification. Addiction narrows your world to what is happening right now. What do I want? What do I need? How do I escape this? Recovery, though, in many ways, asks you to do the exact opposite. It asks you to tolerate uncomfortability today so that you can build a better tomorrow. Addiction narrows your world. Recovery expands it again. So after serving 28 months in prison, Tim was paroled in 1981 and says that his arrest was the absolute rock bottom that forced him to change his trajectory and pursue comedy. While recently promoting Toy Story 5, he reflected back on these years and on the humiliation that he brought to his friends and family, stating with absolute certainty, "I do not want to ever do that again. Prison was the best and the worst thing that ever happened to me. It took away my freedom, but it also gave me my clarity." And here's the part of the story that often gets overlooked. Tim Allen did not walk out of prison and become an immediate overnight success. He still had to rebuild his life, just like we all do. Recovery is not just stopping the thing that's killing you. It's building identity, finding purpose, creating structure, learning to manage your emotions, and above all, creating a life that gives you a reason to stay sober. But after his release, he immediately committed to a relentless routine. He was working as a creative director at a Detroit advertising agency by day and grinding at the comedy clubs by night. And this eventually led him to landing local TV commercials and talk show gigs. And eventually his popularity caught the eye of television producers, directly inspiring them to build the hit show Home Improvement, directly around Tim and his stand-up routine in 1991. Now, although he was no longer battling drugs, during Tim's rise to fame, he secretly began battling with alcohol again, although he was pretty successful at hiding this from his family and friends, at least for now. In June of 1997, however, at the absolute height of his fame, Tim was unfortunately arrested again, this time for a DUI. And facing jail time yet again, Tim admitted himself into a rehab facility and gave their 12-step program his all. And this is something that I think is incredibly important for us to remember about addiction. Recovery is not always a straight line. Someone can make massive changes in one area of their life, but still struggle in another. Someone can stop using and still have unresolved issues. And someone can also be uber successful and still struggling. And most importantly, someone can also relapse without their entire recovery story being erased. So what changed for Tim this time? How did he finally manage to reach the 30-year sober point that he's at today after everything that he had been through? These are the lessons that I've gleaned from researching his story. Tim's consequences became impossible to ignore. He was finally building a life that he truly loved. He was finding success and purpose and happiness, and his addiction put that life at risk. And I think that's when he realized he wasn't willing to lose everything that he worked for. He had a real future to protect now, and so he did. And in my opinion, that's the goal. That is the key to real long-term sobriety. It's building a life that you no longer want to escape from. Because if you can do that, if you build a life that you are so proud of and that you worked so hard to make, you won't want to do anything to mess it up. You will run from relapse. And this time, instead of using comedy to build his career, he used it as a coping mechanism to stay grounded. He has remained entirely sober for 30 years now. And he cites daily discipline, community support, and therapy for keeping his life together for the long haul. Tim has also openly spoken about how his addiction impacted his relationship with his children and shaped his journey as a father to his two daughters, Kate and Elizabeth, often contrasting the two entirely different versions of fatherhood that he experienced with them. His eldest daughter, Kate, was born in 1989, and Alan admits to heavy regrets regarding her childhood, citing that he was not sober for many of Kate's crucial years. This was also during the height of his fame, which means that he was frequently away from home, leaving Kate's mother to do the majority of the parenting. Alan has formally and publicly made amends to his daughter, Kate. He says that he has at this point processed the grief and had open conversations with her about this. And he was very surprised to find that Kate was very forgiving and did not hold this against him. Despite his struggles, Kate says she has picked up many valuable life lessons from him. Now, his youngest daughter, Elizabeth, was born sometime later in 2009, and this was an entirely different experience for them, with Alan calling it a complete 180-degree shift compared to his first experience with fatherhood because he had been sober for Elizabeth's entire life. Alan has stated that Elizabeth never knew that guy, referring to the man that he once was in active addiction. She never saw him angry or under the influence or absent. And that fatherhood is another thing that he credits his ongoing sobriety to. This presence in his daughter's life gave him a reason and a purpose to stay sober. So here's something that I want you to think about. When someone gets sober, we often celebrate the day that they stop using. And that should be celebrated. But what about the people who have to live with the consequences of who they were before they got sober? Taking the first step to repair a broken relationship. The first time someone takes accountability for themselves. Making amends and rebuilding trust. That is what should really be celebrated. That is the difference between I'm sober and I'm in recovery. Sobriety changes your future, but it also asks you to take responsibility for your past. So if there is anything that you take away from Tim's story today, I hope that it's this. You are not your failures. You are, however, human, just as we all are. And despite the mistakes we've made, it is never too late to change direction. I chose Tim Allen for my first celebrity deep dive because I am fascinated by stories like this. I'm someone who has spent years in addiction and in recovery, and I'm someone who believes that recovery isn't just about surviving addiction. It's about actually building a life worth sticking around for. And I think that Tim's story forces us to ask a bigger question. What if the person you are today doesn't have to be the person that you are forever? Tim Allen changed his entire life around. I changed my entire life around. And I know that you can change your entire life around too. And that's why I want to explore celebrity deep dives. Not just what happened to these people, but what their stories can teach us about addiction and overcoming and the possibility of building a new life. So if there is a celebrity addiction story that you would like to hear, please drop it in the comments. I thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And also don't forget that you never have to settle for a subpar life because of your past. I'll see you soon.